The dust on Kalira's face had stopped bothering her 3 hours ago. That was when she'd stopped being able to feel it. Stopped being able to feel anything below her neck, except the kind of pain that made breathing feel like an achievement worth celebrating. The red-orange powder of Kepler 442b settled on her lips with each shallow breath. It tasted like copper and failure. Like the moment she'd said no to Commander Vraxis and watched his face go cold. Like the plasma round he'd fired into her spine while her team stood watching. The sky above was shifting through shades of amber and violet. Sunset on this rock lasted for hours. Some quirk of the planet's rotation that the colonization surveys had called romantic. Kalira had read those reports during the flight in. Prime real estate, they'd said. Breathable atmosphere. Earth-like gravity. A jewel waiting to be claimed. Now it was just another grave with too many bodies and not enough reasons to remember their names. She'd been conscious for most of it. The paralysis had been instant. The kind of spinal trauma that shut everything down from the shoulders down, like someone had flipped a switch. But her mind had stayed sharp. Sharp enough to feel her team's boots vibrating through the ground as they walked away. Sharp enough to count the minutes as her body temperature dropped. Sharp enough to understand that this was how warriors died when their own people decided they were inconvenient. The battlefield stretched out in every direction she could see. Her limited range of vision caught twisted metal and biological matter that used to be soldiers with families. A human gunship lay on its side maybe 50 meters away. Its hull peeled open like someone had used it for target practice with something very large and very angry. Further out, the wreckage of an Azuran war strider, one of her unit's birds, its elegant legs crumpled beneath it. The crystalline cockpit shattered into 1,000 pieces that caught the dying light. She'd stopped counting casualties after the first hour. Stopped trying to calculate which side had lost more. When you were dying on a battlefield, winning and losing became abstract concepts that belonged to people who weren't lying in debris with a hole burned through their nervous system. Her ears still worked, long and swept back the way human mythology portrayed their ancient elves. They caught every sound. The wind moving through broken metal, the distant pop of something still burning, the settling groans of destroyed machinery finding new ways to collapse, and footsteps, human boots. She'd learned to recognize the sound during 3 years of fighting them. Heavier than Azuran combat wear, less elegant, more about function than form. Coming closer, steady pace, methodical. Kalira tried to speak, tried to form the words that would tell this human to finish it quickly. To not let her spend the next few hours watching the stars come out while her body shut down system by system. But her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, a dry rasp that wouldn't carry past her own broken breathing. The footsteps stopped. A shadow fell across her face, blocking out the amber sky, human-shaped, broad shoulders carrying the equipment that marked him as military. She could see the edge of a med kit, the scanner unit hanging from his belt. Combat medic then, probably assigned to tag casualties, to mark the dead and catalog how badly humanity had bled today. Her eyes tracked up to his face, dust-covered, young but weathered in the way soldiers got when they'd seen too much, maybe 30, maybe 40. Humans aged differently than her people did. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind of blank face that came from 3 hours of stepping over corpses. Their eyes met. His were brown, tired, carrying the weight of a very bad day that had started long before he found her. She watched as he pulled the scanner from his belt, watched as the device painted her in electromagnetic radiation, reading her biology, cataloging her injuries, calculating how long she had left. He stared at the readout for a long moment. Then he said more to himself than to her. "This is inconvenient." Kalira's translator implant rendered it in flat tones, no emotion, just a statement of fact from a man looking at a medical impossibility. She shouldn't be alive. Every piece of training, he had probably told him that. The spinal damage alone should have killed her in minutes. But Azuran physiology had always been stubborn. They didn't die easy. Even when dying would be merciful. He crouched down beside her. His knees made a sound like old joints protesting. Like a man who'd spent too many days kneeling beside the dying. The scanner came up again, a deeper scan this time. More detailed. She could feel the pulse of it moving through her body, reading damage that went beyond what eyes could see. Catastrophic spinal trauma, he said quietly, reading the results. Severe plasma burns, internal bleeding that should have killed you twice over. He looked at her face, really looked. Not at an enemy, not at another casualty to tag and forget, but at a person who was still breathing despite every medical reason she shouldn't be. You've got maybe 20 minutes, he continued, and that's generous. The scanner beeped again, drawing his attention to something else. She watched as his eyes narrowed, as he examined the entry wound between her shoulder blades. The angle, the trajectory, the specific pattern of damage that came from close-range plasma fire. Recognition flickered across his face, the kind of understanding that came from seeing too many betrayals wearing friendly colors. This wasn't enemy fire, he said. His voice had changed, gone quieter, harder. This was execution. Kalira managed a sound, something between acknowledgement and the ghost of bitter laughter. Of course, a human medic would recognize it. They probably had plenty of practice identifying which of their own people died from friendly fire and which died from friends who'd stopped being friendly. He sat back on his heels, looking at her, looking at the sunset, looking at his scanner. She could see him calculating, running numbers in his head, making decisions that protocol probably told him were already made. Field regulations were clear. Enemy combatants were to be reported and left for their own retrieval teams. She'd learned the same rules from her side. Don't waste resources on enemy wounded. Don't risk exposure. Tag them. Mark their location. Move on. She'd followed those rules 3 times during this war. 3 times she'd found human soldiers too injured to fight, but not quite dead enough to ignore. 3 times she'd marked their positions and continued her mission. She'd never looked back. Never checked if their people came for them. Never let herself think about what it meant to leave someone to die alone while following proper procedure. The human was looking at his scanner again. Then at something in the distance. Her limited field of vision couldn't track where. But she heard him thinking. Could feel the weight of his decision being made. Protocol said leave her. Duty said move on. Orders said she was enemy. Not his problem. Not his responsibility. Just another casualty on a battlefield full of them. She knew what humans said about her people. That Azurans were cold. That they valued honor more than compassion. That they'd sacrifice anything for duty. Right now, lying in the dust of a dead planet with a hole burned through her spine, she wondered if they were right. The human stood. For a moment, she thought he was leaving. Following protocol like every soldier was supposed to. Like she would have done if their positions were reversed. Then he spoke, and his voice carried something she hadn't expected to hear. Here's the thing, he said, checking his supplies and running calculations he definitely shouldn't be running. I'm having a really bad day. Like top 10 worst days of my life. And I once watched a shuttle crash with my entire unit inside. He started clearing debris from around her, his back protesting the effort with sounds that suggested this wasn't the first heavy thing he'd moved today. Dust cascaded off twisted metal as he shoved pieces aside. So I'm going to make a terrible decision, he continued, grunting with effort. Because at least terrible decisions are interesting, and I could use interesting right about now. Kalira tried to process this, tried to understand what this human was saying, what he was implying. What kind of interesting decision involved clearing debris from around an enemy who was too paralyzed to be a threat and too damaged to be worth saving? She managed to force words through her dry throat. Each syllable cost her. Each breath felt like negotiating with lungs that had mostly given up. You cannot, she said. The words came out broken, rough, but clear enough. I am enemy. He looked down at her, really looked. And for the first time since he'd found her, something like humanity flickered behind the exhaustion in his eyes. Yeah, he said, I noticed the blue skin and the ears. Real subtle your people. Very incognito. He went back to clearing debris, working methodically, moving pieces that probably weighed more than she did, creating space around her broken body like he was planning something that made no sense at all. Kalira watched him work, watched a human medic violate every protocol both their militaries shared, watched him commit what his people would probably call desertion and what her people would definitely call treason. She had to stop this, had to make him understand. Leave me, she said. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by something that might have been anger or might have been the last burst of energy the dying got before the end. Your duty, follow it. He paused in his work, stood up straight. Dust covered him head to toe, made him look like he'd been carved from the same red-orange rock as the planet beneath him. He looked at the setting sun, then at his scanner, then at her, and then he did something she didn't expect. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, wasn't triumphant or cruel or any of the things she'd learned to recognize in 3 years of war. It was tired, sad, the smile of a man who'd made a decision that was going to cost him everything and had decided the cost was worth paying. He knelt beside her again, close enough that she could see the dust in the creases around his eyes, could see the exhaustion that went bone deep, could see something else, something that looked almost like determination. Not a chance, he said quietly. 2 words, simple, final, carrying the weight of a choice that protocol said he shouldn't make, that duty said he couldn't make, that every rule of engagement between their people said was impossible. Not a chance, Kalira stared at him, at this human who was choosing to save her for no reason that made strategic sense, for no gain she could calculate, for no purpose that served his people's war or his own survival. I am dying, she said, stating the obvious, trying to make him see reason. You gain nothing from this. Your people will call it treason. Yeah, probably. He was already pulling out medical supplies, arranging them in neat rows on the ground beside her. But here's the thing about treason. It only matters if someone finds out. And everyone thinks I'm tagging corpses on a dead battlefield. I've got at least a week before anyone notices I'm not where I'm supposed to be. He checked his scanner again, frowned at what it showed him, then looked at her with something that might have been respect. Besides, he said, I left 3 of your people to die before this. Different battlefields, different wars. Follow a protocol every time, tagged them, reported their positions, moved on. He paused. You want to know how many got picked up by your retrieval teams? She didn't answer, didn't need to. They both knew. 0, he continued. Your people left them there, just like mine would have left me if the situations were reversed. So maybe I'm tired of following protocols written by people who've never had to look someone in the eyes while they die alone. He pulled out something that looked like a transport harness, started attaching it to a makeshift stretcher he was constructing from debris. Maybe I'm just tired, he said. Or maybe I'm making the worst decision of my life, probably both. Kalira felt something crack inside her chest. Not physically. Her ribs were broken, but that wasn't what she meant. Something deeper. The part of her that had learned to see humans as the enemy, as the other, as the thing to be fought and defeated and never understood. This human was choosing compassion over duty, was risking everything to save someone he had no reason to save, was committing treason for no better reason than he was tired of being the kind of person who walked away. I do not understand, she said quietly. He looked at her, and for just a moment she saw past the exhaustion, past the dust and the death and the weight of too many bad days. She saw someone who'd made a choice, who'd drawn a line in the red-orange dust and decided this was where protocol ended and humanity began. You don't have to understand, he said. You just have to stay alive. Can you do that for me? Can you stay alive for a few more hours while I drag you through hell to somewhere that isn't here? Kalira thought about her options. She could refuse, could insist he follow protocol, could spend her last 20 minutes maintaining the warrior's pride that said accepting help from the enemy was weakness. Or she could choose to live, even if living meant owing a debt to a human who smiled when he committed treason. Even if it meant survival came with the cost of everything she'd been taught about honor and duty and the clear lines between us and them. I will stay alive, she said. Good. He finished securing the harness around her immobile body, gentle despite the urgency, careful despite the time pressure. Because I'm going to a lot of trouble here, and it'd be really inconvenient if you died on me before I get you somewhere I can actually work. He stood, checked the horizon, calculated distances in his head. There's a temple complex about 3 kilometers northeast, he said. Pre-colonial architecture. Mostly intact according to my scans. Shelter. Maybe even defensible shelter if we're very lucky and also very stupid. He looked down at her, and despite everything, despite the war and the death and the impossibility of what he was attempting, despite protocol screaming that this was wrong, something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond language or species or the clear divisions of military engagement. "My name is Declan," he said. "Declan Bridger, combat medic, professional bad decision maker." He started pulling. The harness took her weight. "I figure if I'm committing treason, you should at least know who to blame." The pain hit immediately, the kind of agony that came from moving a body with catastrophic spinal damage. Kalera's vision went white, then red, then to a place where pain became the only thing that existed. But through it all, she heard his voice. "Stay with me," Declan said, steady, calm. The voice of someone who'd talked dying people through their last moments enough times to know exactly what tone to use. "You don't get to quit now, not after I made a big dramatic declaration. That would make me look stupid." Kalera held on to that voice, used it like a rope in darkness, like something solid when everything else was breaking apart. He pulled. She screamed. He kept pulling. 3 kilometers through hell. 3 kilometers with a human who'd smiled and said not a chance. 3 kilometers that would end with either shelter or death, and right now Kalera couldn't decide which one she wanted more. The temple rose from the landscape like a monument to something older than war. Its walls were carved from stone that predated human and Azuran arrival by millennia. Some other species had built this place, had carved their philosophy, or their grocery list, or their prayers into rock that would outlast both the civilizations currently fighting over the grave they'd left behind. Parts of the ceiling had collapsed, creating shafts of fading light that fell across the floor like searchlights operated by someone with attention problems. The walls were covered in symbols that looked like mathematics and art and language, married into something neither human nor Azuran databases could fully translate. Declan had dragged her to what his scanner called a meditation chamber, which really meant a room where someone had meditated so hard they'd apparently made part of the roof collapse from the sheer force of their introspection. He'd worked fast, clearing the cleanest section of floor, stretching a military tarp across it to create what he generously called a sterile field, though it was about as sterile as a subway station during flu season. Kalera could see him making calculations, weighing contamination risk against time running out, deciding that good enough would have to be perfect enough. She lay on the tarp now, still couldn't move anything below her neck, still felt like someone had replaced her nervous system with liquid fire and broken glass. But the pain was different here, more manageable, like her body had finally accepted that screaming wasn't going to fix anything. The bioluminescent moss growing in the wall cracks cast everything in a faint green glow, like being inside an aquarium designed by someone with depression. The light was enough to work by, barely. Declan unpacked his med kit for the third time, organizing everything in neat rows, alphabetically, by function, by some system that made sense to him and probably to no one else. Organization was clearly how he dealt with chaos, how he imposed order on situations that had no business being orderly. "So," he said, not looking up from his supplies, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain? And before you answer, know that I'm working with human painkillers here, which I'm not even sure won't just poison you. I didn't really cover Azuran pharmacology in med school, mostly because I didn't go to med school." Kalera's translator implant rendered his tone casual, conversational, like he wasn't treating catastrophic spinal trauma in an ancient ruin 3 hours from the nearest medical facility, like this was just another Tuesday. 8, she managed. Her voice was stronger now, the agony of transport fading to something she could breathe through. "Perhaps 9. Your measurement scale is unclear." "Yeah, pain scales are subjective." He pulled out his scanner, started running it over her spine. "One person's 8 is another person's 3. My ex-wife once gave childbirth a rating of 6, then gave me leaving the toilet seat up a rating of 9. So I've learned not to trust the system." And the scanner painted a picture of damage that should have killed her hours ago. Kalera couldn't see the readout, but she could see his face, could watch as medical training warred with the evidence right in front of him. "Your nervous system is trying to rebuild itself," he said, staring at the display like it might change if he looked hard enough. "Which is, I mean, that's not possible. That's not how nervous systems work. I would know. I failed the neurology section of my certification twice. Azuran physiology, Kalira said, and even paralyzed and dying, she managed to sound slightly superior about it. We are adaptive. Under extreme trauma, our bodies attempt regeneration. It is rarely successful. Cheerful. He was checking something else now, marking notes on his datapad. How long does this regeneration usually take? Months, if it works at all. She tried to move her fingers, put effort into it that produced exactly nothing. Most die within weeks. Infection, complications. The regeneration is imperfect. Declan looked at his supplies, at the limited medical material he'd scavenged from the battlefield, at the impossible timeline ahead of them. She could see him calculating odds that didn't favor either of them. Okay, he said finally, pulling out a plasma suture kit, Azurin made, probably taken from one of her people who died today. I'm going to try to stabilize the burns. This is going to hurt. Probably a lot. You might want to scream. I do not scream, Kalira said, drawing on warrior's pride. On 3 years of combat that had taught her pain was temporary, but reputation lasted forever. Noted. He activated the suture. It glowed with contained energy. The kind of medical technology that worked on Azuran tissue because it had been designed specifically for Azuran cellular structure. Let's see how that holds up. He pressed the suture against the plasma burn running along her ribs. Kalira screamed. It started low in her chest and climbed up through octaves she didn't know her voice could reach. A sound that made the ancient stones around them seem to vibrate in sympathy. Her whole body went rigid. Or the parts that could still respond went rigid, which was basically just her head and neck. But she put a lot of effort into it. You said you don't scream, Declan observed, keeping his hands steady despite her reaction, despite the sound that was probably going to haunt his nightmares for months. I lied, she gasped out when she could breathe again. Deception is a warrior's tool. Very convenient philosophy. He moved to the next burn, smaller but deeper. This might be a good time to tell me your name, by the way. I've been mentally calling you Blue, which feels culturally insensitive. Another wave of agony as the suture sealed damaged tissue. Another scream that she tried and failed to suppress. Kalira, she managed when her throat remembered how to form words that weren't just raw pain made audible. Of the Azuran Legion, 3rd Strike Division. Declan Bridger, he said, though he'd already introduced himself. Human, professional bad decision maker, currently making one of my worst. He finished with the suture and set it aside. His hands shook slightly, adrenaline wearing off, the weight of what he'd just done starting to hit. There, he said, the burns are sealed. You're probably going to live another few days, which means I have time to regret this spectacularly. They fell into silence after that, broken only by her ragged breathing. Outside, the sun had fully set. The only light came from his portable lamp and the bioluminescent moss. Everything cast in green and shadow. Kalira stared at the ceiling, at the ancient carvings that might have been prayers or recipes or mathematical proofs, at symbols that predated both their wars and would outlast both their species. Why, she asked finally. You should have left me. Your people will consider this treason. Declan was cleaning his equipment, arranging everything in neat rows because organization was the only thing keeping him from acknowledging the full weight of what he'd just committed to. Yeah, probably, he said. But here's the thing about treason. It only matters if someone finds out. And everyone thinks I'm tagging corpses on a dead battlefield. I've got at least a week before anyone notices I'm not where I'm supposed to be. He sat back against the wall, suddenly exhausted, like he'd been running on fumes and the fumes had just run out. Besides, he continued, I left 3 of your people before this. Different battlefields, different wars, followed protocol every time. He closed his eyes. You want to know how many got picked up? You told me, Kalira said quietly. 0. 0. He opened his eyes, looked at her. So maybe I'm tired of following protocols written by people who've never had to look someone in the eyes while they die alone. Maybe I'm just tired. Kalira absorbed this human who'd saved her for no strategic reason, who'd violated every regulation for nothing more than exhaustion with a system that valued protocol over compassion, who'd looked at her dying and said not a chance like it was the simplest decision in the world. I was prepared to die with honor, she said, on that battlefield, abandoned by my own people. That was warrior's death. Acceptable. And now, Declan asked, now I am alive in enemy hands, depending on mercy I do not deserve, owing debt I cannot repay. She tried to put bitterness into the words but couldn't quite manage it. This is not warrior's death. This is complicated. Yeah, well, Declan stood, started organizing his supplies for what came next. For days and weeks of keeping someone alive who should be dead. Complicated is better than dead. Trust me on that. I'm a medical professional. You said you failed neurology twice. Yeah, but I passed eventually. Third time's the charm. He pulled out a ration bar, split it in half. You hungry? I've got food that tastes like disappointment-flavored cardboard. Very nourishing. Kalira watched him work. This human who treated mortal wounds with steady hands and existential crises with dark humor. Who'd committed treason like it was a reasonable response to a bad day. Who was now trying to figure out how to feed someone who couldn't move their own jaw without help. Declan Bridger, she said, testing the name, watching his reaction. He looked up, met her amber gold eyes with his tired brown ones. You are either the best human I have ever met, she continued, or the worst. I have not decided which. He smiled. That same sad, tired smile he'd worn when he'd knelt beside her on the battlefield and chosen treason over protocol. Yeah, he said, I haven't decided either. Outside, the stars were coming out. Ancient light from distant suns that had been traveling for years to reach this dead planet, where two enemies sat in a temple older than both their wars. Inside, a human medic tried to figure out how to keep an Azuran warrior alive long enough to regret saving her. And Kalira lay on a military tarp in green light, trying to understand why not a chance felt like the most important thing anyone had ever said to her. The days that followed blurred together in patterns of pain and progress. Declan had settled into routines that made survival feel like something more than just not dying. Morning scans to track her regeneration. Afternoon conversations to fill the silence. Evening medication and wound care. She'd learned things about him. Small details that emerged between medical procedures. He'd wanted to be a marine biologist, had spent his childhood convinced he'd study dolphins. But the dolphins had mostly died by the time he was old enough to study them, so he'd joined the military instead. Pessimistic career path, she'd observed on day 3. Realistic, he'd countered. Although to be fair, most of the planets I've seen have been actively on fire, so my sample size might be skewed. She'd told him about Azure Prime in return, about the floating gardens that drifted through the upper atmosphere, the crystalline structures that sang in the wind during storm season, the cities grown from living crystal over generations, shaped by song into spires that touch the clouds. That's significantly more poetic than dying dolphins, he'd said. My descriptions need work. Your description was honest. That has value. Now on day 6, he looked at her with something new in his eyes. Something that might have been hope mixed with the exhaustion that never quite left. You need to know something, he said, settling down against the wall in his usual spot. About why I'm really here, doing this. Kalira waited, watching his face, learning to read the micro-expressions that humans used. The way his jaw tightened when he was deciding whether to speak. The way his eyes went distant when he was looking at something that wasn't in the room. I filed a report once, he said finally, about a lieutenant named Kovich. He ordered an artillery strike on a village, said it was harboring enemy troops. It wasn't, just farmers who'd refused to relocate when we told them to. The words came out flat, carefully controlled, the voice of someone who'd told this story before, maybe to himself, maybe to people who didn't listen. I filed the report through proper channels, he continued, included evidence, did everything by the book. Everything a good soldier is supposed to do when they see something wrong. What happened? Kalira asked, though some part of her already knew. The report disappeared. Lieutenant Kovich got promoted. I got transferred to corpse detail where I couldn't cause trouble. He laughed without humor. Turns out proper channels is just code for shut up and follow orders. Kalira felt something click into place, understanding dawning like light through cracks in broken ceiling. You were betrayed, she said, by your own system for doing what was right. Yeah, he looked at her. So when I found you out there, when I saw that wound pattern, when I realized your own people had executed you and left you to die, I understood exactly what that felt like. Silence stretched between them, heavy with recognition, with the weight of two warriors who'd learned the same lesson from opposite sides of a war. I refused an order, Kalira said, speaking the words for the first time since he'd found her, choosing to tell him, choosing to trust. Commander Vraxis received intelligence about a human colony. Military target, he said. Strategic value. She paused, remembering the moment, the choice, the line she'd drawn in crystalline dust. I reviewed the intelligence. I ran my own scans. It was not military installation. It was civilians, families, children, the kind of target that wins battles but loses wars. So you refused, Declan said quietly. I refuse to relay firing coordinates. By Azuran military law, that is treason. She met his eyes. By my own code, relaying those coordinates would have been murder. And Vraxis shot you for it. Not officially. The report will say I died honorably in combat, but Commander Vraxis put plasma round in my back himself, and my team left me on that battlefield to become another unfortunate casualty. Declan absorbed this. She watched as understanding became something deeper. Became recognition of the kind that only came when two people realized they'd been fighting the same battle from different sides. Then we are both traitors to our causes, Kalira said. Or, Declan said, we're the only ones who aren't. Something shifted in that moment, something fundamental. They weren't just enemy and rescuer anymore, weren't just Azuran and human. They were two people who'd chosen principle over protocol, who'd paid the price for saying no when yes would have been easier, who'd learned that sometimes the enemy wasn't the person on the other side of the war. Sometimes the enemy wore friendly colors and gave orders that made soldiers into murderers. On day 7, the scanner showed results that made Declan check his equipment twice to make sure it wasn't malfunctioning. Your nervous system is actually regenerating, he said, not for the first time. Like repetition might make impossibility make sense. Growing new neural pathways. This is happening. This is real. Kalira had grown stronger these past days, could speak without gasping, could turn her head without feeling like her neck might snap. Small victories that felt monumental when your starting point was complete paralysis. How long, she asked, the question that had been building since he'd first told her about the regeneration. How long until I can move again? Months, Declan said, reading the scanner data. Maybe longer. The regeneration is happening, but it's slow. You're growing scar tissue along with new pathways. It's going to take time and therapy and a lot of pain. Then we begin tomorrow, Kalira said. Not a question. A statement from someone who decided paralysis was temporary inconvenience rather than permanent condition. I will fight. I will walk again. I will testify to what Vraxis did. Declan nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. Okay, he said. Then we start tomorrow. Physical therapy, neural stimulation. Whatever it takes to get you walking again. Get you strong enough to speak truth to people who won't want to hear it. You will help me. Not a chance I'm doing anything else. Movement returned in increments so small they might as well have been theoretical. Kalira had been staring at her left hand for 20 minutes, willing it to move, commanding it with the same authority she'd once used to direct strike teams through plasma storms. Her index finger had become the enemy, the objective, the mission that mattered more than any combat operation she'd ever flown. Move, she thought. Move or I will find a way to punish you for insubordination. The finger twitched. It was barely movement, barely qualified as motion at all, a microscopic shift of flesh and bone that wouldn't have registered on any scale of human achievement. But to Kalira, lying on a tarp in a temple that smelled like ancient stone and bioluminescent moss, it was everything. Did you just flip me off? Declan asked from where he sat against the wall, attempting to jury-rig something that looked like it had been assembled by someone having an argument with basic electronics. I do not know this gesture, Kalira said. Her voice carried triumph she couldn't quite suppress. But if it expresses my victory over paralysis, then yes. She did it again. Focused every ounce of will she possessed. The finger moved. Deliberate this time. Intentional. Under her control for the first time in 8 days. I felt it, she said, wonder creeping into her voice despite Warrior's training that said showing emotion was weakness. I controlled it. I commanded my own body and it obeyed. Declan set down his project, came over with the scanner, ran it across her hand. She watched his face as he read the results, watched as medical skepticism gave way to something that looked almost like hope. Your neural pathways are reconnecting faster than projected, he said. The regeneration is accelerating. Your body is learning to route signals around the damaged sections. How long until I can use my hand fully? Days, maybe a week. He was making notes on his data pad, calculating timelines. But that's just fine motor control. Gross motor function will take longer. Walking, running, combat capability. I will have all of it, Kalira said. Not a question, not a hope. A statement of fact from a warrior who decided paralysis was a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent condition. Yeah, Declan went back to his electronics project. I'm starting to believe you will. The device he was building looked like chaos given physical form. Wires connected to power cells that probably weren't rated for the voltage he was pushing through them. Circuit boards salvaged from 3 different pieces of equipment, 1 human, 2 Azuran, all of them telling his engineering attempt that it had no business existing. What is that? Kalira asked. Neural stimulator, Declan said. Not looking up, focused on connecting something that sparked when the wires touched. In theory, in practice, it's a collection of spare parts held together by hope and solder. Should send electrical pulses through your nervous system. Encourage the regeneration, speed up the reconnection process. You built this from salvage. I built this from desperation and physics textbooks I mostly skimmed. He held up the device. It looked like bad poetry made hardware. This is either going to help or turn you into an attractive paperweight. I'd say the odds are 60-40. Which direction? I'll tell you after we find out. Kalira looked at the device, at the human who'd spent days building it from battlefield debris and medical knowledge he'd probably failed to fully absorb. At the determination in his eyes that said failure wasn't acceptable even when failure was the most likely outcome. Activate it, she said. You sure this is going to hurt? Probably a lot. I was shot in spine by my own commander. I was dragged 3 kilometers across broken terrain. I have endured plasma sutures without anesthetic. She met his eyes. I can endure this. More I demand you increase the power, maximum stimulation, maximum regeneration rate. That'll cook your nerves if I miscalculate. Then do not miscalculate. Declan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded, adjusted settings on the device, attached leads to specific points along her spine, points that the scanner had identified as critical junctions in her nervous system. Last chance to back out, he said. I do not back out. I am Azuran Legion. We advance or we die. We do not retreat. That's a questionable military philosophy. It is our philosophy. He activated the device. Kalira's entire body went rigid. Every muscle she could still control locked tight. Her back arched off the tarp. Electricity ran through her nervous system like an electric storm contained in bone, like someone had replaced her blood with pure energy and set it on fire. For a horrible moment, she thought she was dying, thought Declan had miscalculated, and this was how it ended. Not with honor on a battlefield, but with experimental medical equipment and a human's good intentions. Then her right hand clenched into a fist, not a twitch, not a tremor, a full, deliberate, powerful fist that she controlled completely. I felt that, she gasped when the pulse ended, when she could breathe again, when the electricity stopped being the only thing that existed in the universe. I felt my hand move. I commanded it, and it obeyed. Declan was checking the scanner readings, making sure he hadn't accidentally cooked any important neural pathways, making sure his experimental device had helped rather than harmed. Yeah, he said, satisfaction in his voice. You're welcome. That'll be 1 functioning spine. Please leave payment at the front desk. I have no payment. I'll accept not dying as sufficient compensation. They fell into routine after that. Morning sessions with the neural stimulator. Kalira lying on the tarp while electricity convinced her nervous system to remember what movement felt like. Afternoons for rest, for recovery, for conversations that filled the temple's silence with stories of homes they might never see again. Evenings were for progress checks, for Declan to run his scanner and mark improvements that felt miraculous when your starting point was complete paralysis. By day 15, Kalira could wiggle her toes. Small movements, barely visible, but she could flex them, could make them respond to commands her brain sent down pathways that were rebuilding themselves one neural connection at a time. Day 18 gave her fists, both hands now, strong enough to grip, to hold, to potentially fight it if fighting became necessary. On day 21, she lifted her right arm 3 centimeters off the ground before it collapsed back down, shaking with effort, trembling from exertion that would have been nothing before Vraxis shot her. That now felt like climbing a mountain made of knives. "I was a warrior," she said that night, frustration making her voice sharp, making her forget diplomatic caution. "I commanded strike teams. I flew combat ships through plasma storms. Now I cannot even sit up without assistance." "You were shot in the spine and left to die," Declan pointed out. Running another diagnostic, the scanner had become extension of his hands, always present, always checking, always monitoring her impossible recovery. The fact that you can wiggle your toes is medically miraculous. Give yourself some credit. Credit is earned through achievement, not survival. That's a harsh philosophy. Who taught you that? Kalira was quiet for a moment, thinking about Commander Vraxis. About 3 years of following him into combat, of believing his orders came from wisdom rather than ambition, of learning too late that good soldiers sometimes serve bad commanders. "My commander," she said finally, before he ordered my execution. Declan didn't respond to that, just kept working, kept monitoring, kept being the steady presence that had kept her paralyzed through days that should have killed her 3 times over. The discovery came on day 25, when Declan returned from a supply run looking shaken in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Kalira had grown stronger, could move her head freely now, could shift her upper body with effort, could even prop herself up on her elbows for brief periods before exhaustion forced her back down. She was practicing this, pushing herself up, holding position, counting seconds before collapse, building strength 1 repetition at a time. That's when she saw it, Declan's comm device, sitting on a rock outcropping where he'd left it that morning. Normally he kept it on his belt, kept it close. But today he'd been in a hurry, supply run to the battlefield, scavenging more medical equipment from corpses who weren't using it anymore. He'd forgotten it. Kalira stared at the device. Azuran technology could interface with human systems, could translate communications, could access broadcasts that humans thought were secure. She shouldn't. This was invasion of privacy, violation of trust from the person who'd saved her life, who'd committed treason to keep her breathing. But she was Azuran Legion, and intelligence gathering was part of training. Understanding the enemy was survival skill. Even when the enemy had stopped being enemy and become something else, something complicated. She pulled herself across the floor, centimeters at a time, using her arms, dragging her still useless legs behind her. It took 10 minutes to cross 3 meters, 10 minutes of exhausting effort that left her gasping. But she reached the device. Her fingers still worked. Fine motor control had returned faster than gross motor function. She could manipulate small objects even if she couldn't walk. She activated the comm, set it to scan recent transmissions, human military frequencies, standard protocols. The first message made her blood run cold. "Attention all units. Combat Medic Declan Bridger Service number 77429 declared absent without leave. Last known position Kepler 442b, Battlefield Sector 7. Suspected desertion. Any information regarding his whereabouts should be reported immediately to command. AWOL, not missing, not killed in action. AWOL, which meant they knew he was alive, knew he'd abandoned his post, knew he'd violated protocol in ways that military law didn't forgive. Another voice came through, older, carrying authority that made Kalira's translator implant flag it as senior officer. Lieutenant Kovic. Bridger always had problems with authority. Should have drummed him out after that report he filed. Bleeding heart who couldn't understand that war requires hard decisions. If anyone sees him, remind them there's reward for information. Traitors don't deserve protection. Kalira stared at the device, processing implications that went far beyond what she'd understood. Declan wasn't just helping her. He wasn't just committing minor protocol violation that might earn reprimand or demotion. He was hunted. His own people had declared him deserter. Lieutenant Kovich, the officer he tried to report, was actively pursuing him. He'd sacrificed everything: his career, his freedom, possibly his life, for an enemy he'd found dying on a battlefield. For her, she heard footsteps outside the temple, his boots on ancient stone, returning from the supply run with equipment that would keep her alive another few days. Kalira pulled herself back to the tarp, replaced the comm device where he'd left it, settled into position that suggested she'd been resting the entire time he was gone. Declan entered, carrying medical supplies, looking exhausted but satisfied. He'd found what he needed: another few days of survival purchased with scavenging from the dead. "Good run," he said, setting down his haul, organizing it into neat rows. "Found 2 more Azuran medkits and 1 intact neural scanner. We're good for at least another week." Kalira watched him work. This human who'd never mentioned the cost he was paying, who'd never asked for gratitude or acknowledgement of sacrifice, who'd just smiled and said not a chance, like saving her was the simplest decision in the world. "You did not tell me you were fugitive," she said quietly. His hand stopped moving, went very still. He looked at her with expression she couldn't quite read. "How did you—" He saw the comm device, understood immediately. "You accessed my communications. I'm Azuran intelligence officer. It is my training. It's also an invasion of privacy." Yes, she didn't apologize, didn't justify, just met his eyes with amber gold that held understanding she hadn't possessed an hour ago. "You did not tell me that you are not just violating protocol, that you are declared deserter, that your own people hunt you, that Lieutenant Kovich offers reward for information." Declan sat down against the wall, suddenly looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him, like the weight he'd been carrying had finally become visible. "Didn't seem relevant," he said. "You were dying, are still recovering. My problems didn't factor into keeping you alive. Your problems exist because of me. My problems exist because I chose compassion over duty, because I was tired of being person who follows orders that make him less human." He looked at her. "You didn't make me do anything. I chose this. I choose this every day I wake up and decide to keep you alive instead of turning myself in and claiming temporary insanity. You sacrificed everything." "Yeah." He smiled that tired smile. "But here's the thing. I don't regret it. I regret a lot of things in my life. Failed marriages, missed opportunities. Every time I followed protocol and left someone to die alone." He paused. "But this helping you, this I'll defend. This I'll stand by when they finally catch me." Kalira felt something crack in her chest, the armor she'd built around warrior's pride. The walls that said accepting help was a weakness, the careful distance she'd maintained between enemy and ally. "When they catch you," she said carefully, "not if. When. Yeah." He went back to organizing supplies. "I figure I've got a few more weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky and everyone's incompetent. Eventually someone will get smart. Track supply raids, notice patterns, send search teams, and then I face consequences. Court-martial, probably prison, possibly execution depending on how much Kovich wants to make an example." He shrugged like he was discussing weather instead of his own death. "But by then, hopefully you'll be walking. Be strong enough to testify, to tell your people what Vraxis did, to make sure at least one person who said no to murder gets heard. You will die so I can testify. I'll face consequences so you can live. Big difference." Kalira stared at him. At this human who'd calculated cost of treason and decided she was worth paying it, who'd looked at his own execution and thought it acceptable price for her survival. "I will not let you die alone," she said, voice strong despite paralysis that still claimed most of her body. "When they come, when they find us, I will testify for you as well. I will tell them what you did, why you did it. I will make them understand. They won't listen. Then I will make them listen." Declan looked at her, really looked, and for the first time since finding her, something like hope flickered in his exhausted eyes. Okay, he said. Then we'd better make sure you can walk by then. Can't testify if you can't stand. Day 30 arrived with triumph and disaster in equal measure. Declan had built parallel bars from salvaged metal beams. The structure looked like it had been designed by someone who'd seen pictures of proper medical equipment, but had been very drunk at the time. Uneven, unstable, held together with field welds and aggressive optimism. But it was bars, something to hold, something to use for learning to walk again. Kalira gripped them with hands that finally remembered how to grip. Her arms had grown strong from pulling herself around the temple, from dragging her still uncooperative legs behind her, from refusing to accept that movement meant only what her lower body could do. You're putting too much weight on your left side, Declan observed from where he sat cross-legged on the floor. Watching her technique, compensating for the nerve damage in your right leg. Perhaps if your parallel bars were level, Kalira said through gritted teeth, I would not need to compensate. Those bars are perfectly level. I measured them with my eyes and everything. She managed 3 steps before her right leg locked up. Muscles spasming, neural signals crossing wires that were still rebuilding themselves. She felt herself falling, felt gravity winning the argument her body was having with vertical orientation. Declan caught her before she hit the ground, taking her weight easily, like he'd practiced this, like he'd been preparing for exactly this moment. They both went down anyway, her momentum carrying them to the stone floor, landing in a tangle of limbs that probably looked more comedic than medical. Kalira started laughing. It began as a chuckle and built into something that shook her whole body. Wild, uncontrolled, the kind of laughter that came from joy rather than humor. I fell, she gasped out between laughs. I can fall now. This is progress. Yeah, terrific progress, Declan said from beneath her, his voice slightly crushed. My ribs are celebrating. But he was laughing too, because after 23 days of watching her unable to move, after countless hours of neural stimulation and physical therapy and stubborn refusal to accept paralysis as permanent, seeing her actually fall, seeing her body cooperate enough to attempt vertical motion, even if vertical motion ended with horizontal results. That was victory. They tried again an hour later. This time she made it to 7 seconds before her knees buckled. Then 9 seconds. By the end of the day, she'd managed 15 seconds of standing, leaning heavily against the bars, but upright, vertical, defying the paralysis that should have been permanent. You're getting there, Declan said as he helped her back to the tarp. Few more weeks, and you'll be walking laps around this temple. I will walk farther than that. I will walk to Azure Prime. I will walk into the crystalline council chamber. I will walk to testify. Yeah, he smiled. I believe you will. They'd developed routines beyond physical therapy, evening conversations that had started as necessity and evolved into something neither of them wanted to name. Kalira teaching him Azuran breathing exercises for the nightmares he had about battlefields and burning villages. Declan introducing her to earth music that his datapad had survived 2 years of combat to preserve. This one sounds like sadness wearing sunglasses, she observed one night, listening to what he called apocalypse blues, music made by humans who'd watched their planet dying and decided to soundtrack it. That's blues music, Declan explained. That's literally the entire genre. Why would anyone create art from sadness? Because sometimes sadness is all you've got, and you might as well make it beautiful. Her long Azuran ears twitched, processing frequencies humans couldn't quite catch, hearing harmonics in the music that existed beyond their species' range. Your people are complicated, she said. Your people sing cities into existence. That is practical. This is, she searched for the word, unnecessary beauty. The best kind. They argued about consciousness one night, about whether it required biology or could exist as pure energy. Kalira's people believed in the crystalline collective, a theoretical state where individual consciousness could merge into a shared network maintained by the singing crystals of Azure Prime. So you fear losing individuality? Kalira observed after he'd expressed skepticism that bordered on horror. I fear a lot of things. That's on the list somewhere between spiders and running out of coffee. He was attempting to fix a tear in his uniform, His stitching looked like it had been done by someone having a seizure. But yeah, the idea of dissolving into some collective consciousness doesn't appeal. I like being me, even if me is a disaster making bad decisions in a temple on a dead planet. You are not disaster. I'm harboring an enemy soldier in violation of about 40 different military regulations. That's pretty much the definition. You are the person who saved my life. Yeah, and your stitching is vastly superior to mine. Give me that. She took the uniform from his incompetent hands. Her fine motor control had returned faster than gross motor function. She could manipulate a needle even if she couldn't walk more than a few meters. 2 months ago, Declan said, watching her work, if someone had told me I'd be sitting in an ancient temple teaching an Azuran warrior about blues music while she fixed my uniform, I'd have checked them for head trauma. 2 months ago, I would have killed you on sight, Kalira said, concentrating on the stitching, making it neat, professional, the kind of work that came from years maintaining equipment in field conditions. Yeah, and I would have left you to prime following proper protocol. He paused. Look at us now, growing as people. She finished the repair, handed back the uniform. The stitching was perfect. Military-grade work that would hold under stress. We are either growing or losing perspective on our duties, she said. I am uncertain which. Can it be both? Perhaps perspective is just growth wearing different armor. Kalira made her mistake on day 35 when Declan was away on a supply run, and ambition exceeded capability by a margin that nearly killed her. She'd been making progress. Walking 10 meters now, sometimes 12. Her legs remembered more each day. Remembered what strength felt like, what balance required, what movement meant beyond just willing muscles to contract. She decided to push further. The temple entrance was 20 meters from her tarp, 20 meters of ancient stone floor that led to actual outside, to air that wasn't filtered through moss and memory, to light that came from a sun instead of bioluminescent fungus. 20 meters. She'd walked 12 meters yesterday. 20 couldn't be that much harder. Kalira pulled herself upright using a rock outcropping, stood without support for almost 30 seconds. Her record, her victory, her proof that paralysis was temporary condition rather than permanent state. She took the first step, unsteady but successful. Second step, third, finding rhythm, finding balance, finding the warrior's grace that had made her one of the Legion's best pilots. 10 meters, she'd matched yesterday's record. Kept going, 15 meters, her legs trembling, muscles screaming, neural pathways firing signals that sometimes reached their destination and sometimes went nowhere. 18 meters, so close to standing in actual sunlight, to proving she could reach the entrance, to showing herself that recovery meant more than just surviving. Her right leg locked up, complete muscle failure, neural pathway that just stopped carrying signals, like someone had cut a wire in the middle of transmission. She fell. Not the controlled fall she'd been practicing with the parallel bars, not the tumbles where Declan caught her. This was uncontrolled, unrecovered, the kind of fall that happened when your body just stopped cooperating mid-stride. She hit the stone floor hard, felt something crack, probably rib, pain blooming across her torso in waves that made plasma burns feel like warm hugs. She tried to get up, couldn't. Her legs wouldn't respond. The neural stimulation had pushed them too far, fatigued them past their current capacity. Now they just lay there, dead weight attached to a body that had forgotten how to make them work. Kalira tried to crawl back to the tarp. Managed maybe a meter. Her arms gave out, exhausted from the walk, from pulling her weight, from doing the work that legs should have done, but couldn't. She lay there, 2 meters from where she'd fallen, 20 meters from her goal, 1,000 kilometers from being whole again. The hours passed. The light shifted through the temple. Morning becoming afternoon, becoming something later. The bioluminescent moss starting to glow as darkness crept across the floor. Kalira stared at the ceiling, at carvings that predated both their wars, at symbols that might have been prayers or mathematics, or recipes for something the ancient builders had considered important enough to preserve in stone. I will never fly again, she said to the empty temple, to the ancient stones that didn't answer, To herself because there was no one else to hear. I will never command strike teams. I will never stand in the crystalline council chamber because I cannot even walk to the entrance of this temple. Despair settled over her like physical weight, like gravity had increased, like the universe had decided paralysis was permanent after all, and these past weeks of progress had been cruel joke rather than genuine recovery. Perhaps dying on that battlefield would have been mercy, she whispered. Perhaps Declan should have followed protocol. Perhaps this was all mistake. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, to unconsciousness, to anything except lying on cold stone while her body refused to cooperate and her mind cataloged everything she'd lost. That's when she heard footsteps, Declan's boots, running, moving fast across the temple floor. Kalira, his voice sharp with concern, with fear that something had gone wrong, that he'd come back to find her dead despite weeks of keeping her alive. He dropped to his knees beside her, hands immediately checking for injuries, for bleeding, for any of the thousand things that could go wrong with a recovering spinal trauma patient. What happened? He demanded. Did you fall? Did something break? Talk to me. I tried to walk to entrance, she said. Voice flat, empty of the warrior's pride she'd been holding on to. I failed, I fell. I cannot get up. I am broken. You're not broken, you're recovering. I am burdened. You should save yourself. Turn yourself in. Claim temporary insanity. They might show mercy if you abandon me now. Declan pulled back slightly, looked at her face, at the despair that had replaced determination, at the warrior who'd finally hit the wall, that everyone hit eventually when fighting seemed pointless and giving up seemed reasonable. Leave me, Kalira said, speaking the words she'd said 30 days ago on a battlefield, when she'd wanted mercy, when she'd wanted end to pain that felt infinite. You gain nothing from this. I will never be whole. I will never testify. I will die here eventually. Let it be without dragging you down with me. Declan sat back, silent for a long moment, looking at her with expression she couldn't read. Then he smiled, that same tired, determined smile he'd worn when he'd knelt beside her on a battlefield and chosen treason over protocol. Not a chance, he said quietly. We came too far. You don't quit on me now. Why do you care? Because you're not just surviving anymore. You're fighting. You walked 18 meters today. That's 6 more than you could walk last week. That's infinity more than you could walk a month ago. He moved to lift her, to carry her back to the tarp. Progress isn't linear. Sometimes you fall, sometimes you fail, but you're still progressing. You're still fighting, and that matters. It does not feel like it matters. No, it feels like you're lying on a cold floor having tried something impossible and fallen short. He settled her back on the tarp, started checking her ribs, making sure the fall hadn't caused serious damage. But here's what you're going to do tomorrow. You're going to try again. You're going to walk. Maybe you'll make it 10 meters, maybe 15. Maybe you'll actually reach that entrance and stand in sunlight. Or maybe you'll fall again. He met her eyes, held her gaze with brown eyes that had seen too much death and chosen to fight for life anyway. But you'll try, because you're a Zaran Legion, because you're a warrior who refused to murder civilians and paid for it with paralysis and betrayal, because you decided you were going to testify and make someone listen. He paused, because you're not alone in this, not anymore. Kalira felt tears forming, first time since Vraxis shot her, first time since her team walked away, first time since she had understood that honor sometimes meant dying alone while everyone else followed orders. I am not alone, she repeated. Not a chance, Declan said. I'm here. I'm staying here, and we're going to get you walking, get you strong, get you ready to testify. She laughed despite the tears, despite the pain in her ribs, despite exhaustion that came from pushing too hard and falling short. You are disaster who makes questionable decisions, she said. Yeah, he agreed, but they're my questionable decisions, and I'm sticking with them. Something shifted in Kalira that night, not just physically, not just the determination to keep trying. Her voice changed, grew stronger. She'd been speaking as victim who'd survived. Now she spoke as warrior who'd conquered. The difference mattered. The warning arrived on day 42 while Declan was on what should have been a routine supply run. He returned early, running, moving fast in a way that spoke of urgency, of danger, of time running out. "We have a problem," he said, slightly breathless, setting down supplies with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline. "Major problem." Kalira sat up. She could do that now, could prop herself against the wall, could stay upright for hours at a time. Progress that felt miraculous when measured against paralysis. "What problem?" "Azuran patrol." He pulled up his scanner, showed her the readings, 3 signatures, moving in systematic search pattern. Professional, methodical, not random scavenging. They're conducting grid search of the region, very thorough, very organized. Kalira studied the pattern, recognized the methodology. This was 3rd Strike Division search protocol. Her division, her people. "This is not standard battlefield recovery," she said. "This is targeted search operation." "Yeah, that's what I thought too." Declan was marking their movement on the map display. They started at the main impact site weeks ago, working outward in expanding circles. Standard 3rd Strike protocol. We just got lucky they started on the opposite side of the region. But their pattern is closing in. Understanding hit her like plasma fire. "They are looking for me. Vraxis suspects I survived. He sent them to find me, to ensure I do not testify, or to ensure no one ever knows what he did." They both understood what that meant. Vraxis didn't want her captured, didn't want her returned to Azure Prime where she might speak, might tell the truth, might expose him. He wanted her silenced, permanently. "How long do we have?" Kalira asked. Already calculating, already planning, already shifting from recovery patient to combat officer making strategic assessments. 3 days maximum if their pattern holds, probably less if they increase search speed. Declan was checking supplies, making inventory. 3 days to get you walking well enough to face them, to get you strong enough to stand and deliver testimony. "I cannot run, cannot move quickly. I will slow you down." "Then we don't run. We stand, we face them." He looked at her. "You wanted to testify. Here's your chance. Captain Theron leads that patrol. I recognize his ship's signature. He's Legion Command. He can take your testimony directly." Kalira absorbed this. 3 days until confrontation. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to become strong enough to stand before her own people and speak truth that might get her killed. 3 days to make Vraxis pay for shooting her in the back and leaving her to die. "Then we prepare," she said, voice carrying the authority she'd once used to command strike teams. "Intensive training, maximum neural stimulation. Push my recovery to limits. That's going to hurt. I have endured worse. You might cause permanent damage if we push too hard. Better permanent damage than permanent silence." Declan nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. This wasn't about medical caution anymore. Wasn't about optimal recovery timelines. This was about being strong enough to speak when the moment came, being whole enough to stand and deliver testimony that might actually matter. "Okay," he said, "then we train. 3 days. We make you into something strong enough to face them, strong enough to test of them, strong enough to make them listen." They spent the next 3 days pushing limits that probably shouldn't be pushed. Day 43, Kalira walked 30 meters, fell twice, got back up both times, walked another 15 meters before exhaustion forced her to rest. Day 44, 50 meters, only fell once, managed to catch herself, managed to stay upright through sheer force of will. Day 45, she walked the full perimeter of the meditation chamber, 80 meters without stopping, her legs screaming, her nervous system begging for rest. But she kept moving, kept proving that paralysis was choice she refused to make. Day 46, she walked outside, actually made it to the temple entrance, stood in actual sunlight for the first time in over a month, felt warmth on her blue skin that wasn't bioluminescent moss or artificial heating. Declan stood beside her, watching her face, watching as she turned toward the sun and let light touch features that had been too long in darkness. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Strong enough," Kalira said. "Not whole, not healed, but strong enough to stand, strong enough to speak." She looked at him, at the human who'd committed treason with a smile, who'd spent 46 days teaching her body to remember movement, who stood ready to face consequences for choosing compassion over protocol. Strong enough to testify, she finished. They'll try to silence you. Then I will speak louder. They might not listen. Then I will make them listen. It might not change anything. She thought about Commander Vraxis, about the civilian colony he'd wanted to destroy, about the plasma round he'd fired into her spine when she'd said no, about the official report that said she'd died honorably when the truth was she'd been executed for refusing murder. It will change me, she said. I will not die silent. I will not let his crime be buried under convenient casualties and official reports. She looked at the horizon, at the direction the patrol would come from, at the future that was 72 hours away and closing fast. And if they kill me for it, she continued, at least I will have tried. At least I will not have followed orders that made me less than warrior, less than person who could look at herself and accept what she saw. Declan stood beside him, two enemies who weren't enemies anymore. Two warriors who'd chosen principle over protocol. Two people who'd found something in a temple on a dead planet that neither of them had names for. Okay, he said quietly. Then we face them. Together. Together, Kalira agreed. The sun set on Kepler 442b. The stars came out, ancient and uncaring above a planet that had seen too much death. But in the temple, two people prepared to speak truth to power, to face consequences, to make someone listen, and maybe, against all odds, to change something that mattered. The warrior who'd whispered, "Leave me on a battlefield," had become the commander who would stand upright and declare truth. Not different people. Evolution of the same person who'd learned that survival meant more than breathing. It meant speaking. Dawn on day 47 came with 3 Azuran soldiers in full combat armor and questions that didn't have easy answers. Kalira stood at the temple's barricaded entrance. Actually stood. Without support. Without leaning. Vertical and defiant in ways that should have been impossible for someone who'd been paralyzed 47 days ago. Her legs trembled. Her nervous system sent signals that sometimes reached their destination and sometimes got lost in the scar tissue still healing along her spine. But she stood. That was what mattered. That was what she'd fought for. Declan stood beside her. Not in front, not behind, beside. His scanner tracking the patrol's approach. His weapon charged but holstered. His presence steady in the way that had kept her alive through weeks that should have killed her. You sure about this? He asked quietly. Last chance to hide, to run, to claim you were my prisoner. When they scan me, Kalira said, voice strong despite the fear that wanted to make it shake. They will find 2 months of human medical intervention. They will find neural stimulator attached to my spine. They will find evidence of care rather than captivity. Yeah, that's what I figured. She looked at him, this human who'd committed treason with a smile, who'd said not a chance like it was the simplest decision in the world, who'd spent 47 days teaching her body to remember what movement felt like. I will not let them harm you, she said. That's not your job. You made it my job when you refused to leave me to die. Fair point. The patrol cleared the outer ruins. 3 soldiers moving with precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Professional, cautious, weapons ready but not raised, scanning for threats without assuming every shadow contained one. Their armor was ceremonial style, 3rd Strike Division markings, Kalira's division, her people, coming to find what was supposed to be her corpse and finding instead a warrior who'd refused to die quietly. The lead soldier's armor displayed captain's insignia, their own. She recognized the gait, the way he moved, careful but direct, honor-bound but practical. One of the few Legion commanders who'd question orders when orders stopped making strategic sense. His scanner swept the temple. Electromagnetic pulse that painted everything in data. 2 life signs, 1 human, 1 Azuran. Together in a barricaded chamber that suggested cooperation rather than captivity. Theron stopped. His squad flanked him. Professional spacing. Cover positions. Not aggressive but ready. The kind of tactical formation that could shift from peaceful contact to combat response in seconds. His external speakers activated. Voice amplified to carry through stone walls and barricades made from rubble. This is Captain Theron of the Azuran Legion 3rd Strike Division. We are detecting two life signatures in this structure. One matches Commander Kaelira's biological profile. A pause. Weight behind the words. Commander, if you can hear this signal, your status. Are you under duress? Kaelira took a breath. This was the moment, the choice, the line between survival and testimony, between staying hidden and speaking truth that would cost her everything or change everything or possibly both. She could signal distress, could let them breach the chamber and eliminate Declan, could reclaim her old life minus the parts where her own commander had shot her and her own team had left her to die. It would be practical, strategic. The choice that made sense if survival was the only objective that mattered. But survival had stopped being enough somewhere around day 8 when her finger had twitched and Declan had smiled like she'd won a war instead of a microscopic victory over paralysis. I am not under duress, Kaelira called back, her voice carrying through stone. Through 47 days of choices that couldn't be unmade, through the weight of testimony she was about to deliver. I am exactly where I choose to be. Silence outside. The kind of silence that meant people were processing information that didn't fit any protocol they'd trained for. That didn't match any scenario their tactical briefings had covered. Commander Kaelira. Theron's voice carried confusion, attempting to maintain professional neutrality. Please clarify your situation. You are with a human combatant, alone in unsecured location. Yes. She moved closer to the barricade. Let them see her through the gaps. Let them see she stood upright, that she spoke freely, that whatever they thought was happening didn't match reality. And I will clarify completely. But first, lower your weapons. The human with me is not combatant. He is medical personnel. He is reason I am alive to speak with you. More silence. Then Theron's voice again. Careful now, walking diplomatic tightrope between duty and curiosity. Commander Standard Protocol requires. I am aware of protocol, Kaelira interrupted, authority in her voice. The tone she'd used to command strike teams through situations where protocol became suggestion rather than law. I helped write 3rd Strike protocols. I know what regulations require. I am telling you, those regulations do not apply to this situation. She took another breath, preparing for words that would either save them or condemn them, but would definitely be heard. I am telling you that I was not killed in combat 47 days ago. I was executed by Commander Vraxis for refusing to relay firing coordinates on civilian target. He shot me in the spine and my team left me to die on that battlefield while official reports classified it as honorable combat death. The words fell into silence like stones into water, creating ripples that would spread in ways she couldn't predict or control. This human found me dying, she continued. This human chose compassion over protocol. This human spent 47 days repairing what our own forces destroyed, and I owe him life debt that supersedes your authority, your orders, and your war. Declan whispered beside her, that was a really good speech. Very dramatic. Thank you, I practiced. They're definitely going to shoot us now. Probably, but at least they will have heard truth first. More silence outside. Longer this time. She could imagine the conversation happening, the rapid tactical assessment, the weighing of evidence against protocol, the decision tree that had to account for scenarios no one had thought to include in training manuals. Then a different voice, older, carrying more weight, authority that came from decades rather than just rank. Commander Kaelira. The scanner flagged it as Captain Theron removing his helmet, speaking directly instead of through filtered electronics. I was told you died 47 days ago, honorably, in combat. The report was filed by Commander Vraxis himself. The report is a lie. Kaelira's voice didn't shake, didn't waver. Warrior speaking truth to power with spine that had rebuilt itself through sheer stubborn refusal to accept paralysis as permanent. And I will tell you exactly how I know. She told them everything. Spoke through the barricade to soldiers who were supposed to be her brothers in arms, but had become something more complicated. Told them about the intelligence on the human colony. 300,000 civilians. Minimal military presence. The kind of target that won battles but lost wars and cost souls. She told them about refusing. About reviewing the intelligence personally. about running her own scans that confirmed what she'd suspected, about telling Vraxis no when no was the only answer that let her keep being person she could accept. She told them about the plasma round, close range, between the shoulder blades, the specific kind of betrayal that came from someone you'd followed into combat for 3 years, someone you'd trusted to give orders that made strategic sense and moral sense simultaneously. She told them about lying in debris for hours, about her team walking away, about official reports that would say she died with honor when the truth was she died for having too much honor to murder civilians on command. And she told them about Declan, about a human medic who'd found her with 20 minutes left to live and said not a chance when protocol told him to move on, about 2 months of medical care that violated every regulation both militaries shared, about neural stimulation and physical therapy and learning to walk again one impossible step at a time. So that is situation, she finished, voice strong despite exhaustion from standing so long, despite fear that her own people might decide testimony was inconvenient. That is truth. I refused illegal order. I was executed for it. I survived because human chose compassion over duty. And now I stand before you to testify to crimes that official reports have buried under convenient casualties. The silence that followed felt eternal. Felt like the moment before a plasma fire, before battles, before the universe decided which version of reality would win and which would die trying. Then Captain Theron spoke. These are serious accusations, Commander. These are facts. Kalera's voice cut through any attempt at diplomatic neutrality. And I will testify to them before the Crystalline Council. I will speak under oath. I will submit to any verification scan you require. I will prove every word. Another pause, shorter this time. Stand down, Theron ordered, though it wasn't clear if he was talking to his squad or to them or to the situation itself. We are not breaching. Commander Kalera, you are requested to return to Azure Prime to give formal testimony. He paused. She could hear him choosing words carefully, walking line between duty and something that looked almost like justice. The human. Longer pause. The human will be granted safe passage as your guest. Guest is Azurian for polite prisoner, Declan asked quietly. It means they will not shoot you immediately, Kalera said. This is improvement. I'll take it. They began clearing the barricade, moving stones that had kept them hidden for 47 days. Exposing themselves to people who could still decide testimony was less convenient than silence. Kalera moved slowly, each step deliberate, controlled, showing strength without pretending she was fully healed, showing progress without claiming false completeness. Declan stayed beside her, not supporting, not guiding, just present, the steady force that had kept her alive through impossible recovery. They emerged into morning light, real sunlight, not filtered through broken ceiling or bioluminescent moss. Actual dawn on Kepler 442b, falling across a warrior who'd been left by Ina and had chosen to live instead. The three Azuran soldiers stared. Kalera understood what they were seeing. Catastrophic spinal trauma didn't heal. Plasma burns through neural tissue didn't regenerate. Warriors shot by their own commanders didn't walk back into formation 47 days later, with testimony that would shake Legion Command. But here she stood, proof that impossible was just difficult that required more time. Captain Theron stepped forward. His armor retracted to show a face carved from blue stone in decades of combat. Scars ran across his features. Not decorative, not ceremonial. The kind of scars that came from being in the wrong place at exactly the right time to learn something important about mortality. This is unprecedented, he said. Yeah, I get that a lot. Declan's voice carried exhaustion that made humor sound like survival strategy. I'm great at making precedents, terrible at following them, excellent at creating them. Theron ignored him, kept focus on Kalera, on the warrior who should be dead, standing upright and ready to speak. Commander Kalera. Formal now, official. This was going on record somewhere. You understand what you are claiming. Execution by superior officer. Conspiracy to commit war crimes. Falsification of combat death reports. I understand what I am testifying, Kalera corrected. Not claiming, testifying. There is difference. These accusations will trigger formal investigation. Commander Vraxis will be recalled. Your testimony will be examined, verified, challenged. Good. Let him be recalled. Let my testimony be challenged. Let everything be examined. She met his eyes, amber gold to his steel gray, warrior to warrior, truth to authority. I have spent 47 days learning to stand again. I can stand through investigation. I can stand through challenges. I can stand and speak until someone listens. Theron studied her, reading something in her stance, in her voice, in the way she held herself despite legs that trembled from effort and nervous system that was still learning to route signals around scar tissue. Very well. He turned to his squad. Lieutenant Syra, come forward. The third soldier stepped closer, removed her helmet with hands that shook slightly, revealed features that Kalira recognized immediately. Young, maybe 5 years younger than Kalira herself. Long silver hair bound in combat braids. Eyes that held something between shame and hope and determination. Lieutenant Syra, Kalira's voice carried shock. Recognition, understanding that hit like plasma fire remembered. You were on my team. You were there. Yes, Commander. Syra's voice was steady but carried weight that decades couldn't match. I was there when Commander Vraxis received the intelligence. I was there when you refused his order. I was there when he shot you. The words hung in morning air like accusations made physical. And I did nothing, Syra continued. He threatened me, join you or follow orders. And her voice broke slightly. I followed orders. I watched you fall. I watched the team walk away. I carried that shame every day since. Kalira absorbed this. Her second in command, her protege, her friend, standing here admitting she'd chosen survival over intervention, had chosen protocol over principle. Anger wanted to surface, wanted to demand why. Why had no one stayed? Why had no one questioned? Why had everyone just followed orders and let her die? But she looked at Syra's face, saw shame that had spent 47 days turning into something harder, something that looked almost like resolve. Why are you here? Kalira asked. Captain Theron initiated quiet investigation after I reported concerns. But without evidence, without proof, we could not act against Commander Vraxis. Syra took a step forward. Your survival is proof we needed. Your testimony is evidence that changes everything. She came to attention, full military posture, lieutenant addressing superior officer, despite the fact that Kalira was technically dead according to official reports. I failed you once, Commander. I will not fail you again. I will testify beside you. I will confirm everything you say. I will make them listen. Kalira looked at this young officer who'd chosen wrongly once and was trying to choose rightly now, who'd lived 47 days with shame and was trying to transform it into action. She could refuse, could condemn, could make Syra pay for the choice she'd made to walk away and let her commander die alone. Or she could accept, could transform shame into testimony, could turn failure into witness who would strengthen her case instead of standing alone against entire military structure. Then testify, Kalira said, voice hard but not cruel, demanding but not punishing. Make it mean something. Make your 47 days of shame worth the 47 days I spent learning to walk again. Yes, Commander. Captain Theron watched this exchange with expression that suggested he was reassessing multiple assumptions simultaneously. Commander Kalira, I need to inform you of recent developments. He pulled up a holographic display. Federation news feeds, military bulletins, official communications that had been marked classified until hours ago. There was an anonymous intelligence transmission 2 days ago, data package that prevented major civilian casualties at New Meridian Colony. 300,000 lives saved. Kalira felt Declan tense beside her. They both knew what transmission he meant. The one she'd sent. The one that had exposed their location but saved civilians Vraxis would have murdered. We traced the source signature, Theron continued, found embedded metadata in the transmission. Commander Vraxis's personal communications to human contacts. Coordination of illegal strike operations. Evidence of conspiracy that went far beyond one refused order. He shifted the display, showed faces, human officers, Azuran commanders, People on both sides who'd been using the war as cover for actions that violated every treaty both governments pretended to follow. Lieutenant Kovich. The name appeared beside a human face. Cold eyes, expression that suggested morality was optional when ambition was at stake. Your people's officer was coordinate contact for these operations. Declan's breath caught. The lieutenant he'd tried to report, the one who'd buried his complaints and gotten him assigned to corpse detail, connected to Vraxis, part of the same conspiracy. They are both under investigation as of 6 hours ago, Theron said. Your transmission broke open something larger than one execution, larger than one refused order. You exposed network of war crimes that operated behind official channels. Kalira processed this. Her survival hadn't just saved herself. Her testimony wasn't just about her execution. She'd triggered something that reached far beyond one warrior's refusal to murder civilians. So they will face justice, she said. They will face investigation. Whether that becomes justice depends on testimony, evidence, witnesses willing to speak despite cost. He looked at her directly. Warrior to warrior, officer to officer. Person who'd seen too much to accept easy answers to person who'd paid for refusing them. You have 3 options, Commander Kalira. He outlined in them methodically. Professional assessment of paths that all led to different versions of consequence. Option 1, return to Azure Prime. Testify before Crystalline Council. Focus on Azuran crimes. Let human military handle Kovich internally. Option 2, submit to human custody with testimony protection. Focus on conspiracy from human legal perspective. Let Azure Prime handle Vraxis internally. Option 3. He paused, longer this time. Neutral Station Epsilon, Joint Tribunal. Testify to both councils, against both militaries. Expose entire network instead of just one side. He let the weight settle, let her understand what each path cost. First option is safest, home territory, familiar legal system, but limited scope. Your testimony only affects Azuran command structure. Second option protects the human, gets him clemency, but removes you from your own people's justice system, makes you depend on human government that has reason to bury parts of truth. Third option, the pause extended. Third option changes everything. Joint tribunal is rare, used only for crimes that cross all boundaries. Your testimony there becomes public record for both governments, both militaries, every news feed and historical archive. You expose everyone, every crime, every commander who gave illegal orders, and every soldier who followed them. You become symbol for something larger than one execution or one conspiracy. But you also become target for people who want truth buried, for systems that protect themselves by eliminating inconvenient witnesses, for the kind of danger that makes bodyguards nervous and makes lawyers recommend witness protection for rest of your life. Kalira absorbed all 3 paths, weighed safety against impact, survival against testimony that might actually change something beyond just her own vindication. She thought about Commander Vraxis, about Lieutenant Kovich, about all the other officers on both sides who gave orders that made soldiers into murderers and buried the evidence under official reports. She thought about the civilian colony, 300,000 people who were alive because she transmitted intelligence despite the cost, who would never know her name but existed because she'd chosen principle over protocol. She thought about Declan, about a human who'd committed treason with a smile, who'd spent 47 days teaching her body to remember walking, who stood beside her now, ready to face consequences for choosing compassion over duty. And she thought about herself, about the warrior she'd been, about the person she'd become lying on a battlefield choosing death over murder, about the individual she was still becoming, learning to stand despite paralysis that should have been permanent. I choose neutral station, she said, voice clear, strong, carrying conviction that came from 47 days of fighting for every movement. I choose option 3. Commander, I choose to testify to everyone, both militaries, both councils, every crime, every conspiracy, every order that made good soldiers follow bad commands. She took a step forward, her legs held, her balance maintained, her body cooperating enough to make the gesture mean something physical as well as symbolic. I will make them answer for every order that made soldiers into murderers. I will speak until every news feed carries my testimony. Until every historical archive records what happened on that battlefield 47 days ago and what has been happening in shadows of this war for years. You understand the risk, Theron said. Not a question. Statement of fact from officer who'd seen enough combat to know that bravery and stupidity often looked identical until afterwards. I understand honor, Kalira replied. That is enough. Theron nodded slowly, something like respect in his eyes. Very well, Commander. Neutral station it is. He turned to Declan. And you human, what is your choice? Declan looked at Kalira, at this Azuran warrior who'd spent 47 days transforming paralysis into testimony, who was choosing the hardest path because hard paths were the ones that might actually matter. He smiled, that same tired, determined smile he'd worn when he'd knelt beside her on a battlefield and chosen treason over protocol. I'll walk beside her while she does it, he said simply. You could face charges yourself, Theron pointed out. Desertion, aiding enemy combatant, violations of approximately 40 different military regulations. Yeah, I'm aware, but here's the thing. Declan looked at Kalira, at 47 days of refusing to accept that following orders meant doing right. She chose to testify instead of staying silent, chose the hard path instead of the safe one. I figure the least I can do is support that choice. You will be questioned, investigated. Your actions will be examined. Good. Let them examine. Let them question. He shrugged. Maybe they'll learn something. Probably they won't. But at least we'll have tried. Kalira felt something shift in her chest. The bond that had formed over 47 days of medical care and conversation and learning to trust enemy who'd stopped being enemy and become something neither of them had words for. Not romance, not friendship exactly. Something deeper. Something that came from choosing principle together and paying price together and standing together when standing meant facing consequences that scared people who thought about them too long. Then we go to neutral station, she said. Together. Together, Declan agreed. The transport lifted off from Kepler 442b, banking toward orbit, toward neutral station Epsilon, toward joint tribunal and testimony that would expose crimes on both sides of a war that had forgotten why it was fighting. Kalira stood at the viewport, watching the planet shrink beneath them, the place where she'd been left to die, where she'd learned to live instead, where two enemies had become something else in a temple older than both their wars. You are certain about this, Declan asked quietly, standing beside her. Joint tribunal means no safe paths, no easy exits, just testimony and consequences. I am certain of honor, Kalira said. Everything else is details. They reached orbit. The transport aligning for jump to neutral space, to the station where both governments maintained embassies and pretended to negotiate in good faith while planning next offensive. Neutral station Epsilon hung in space like a promise kept by people who'd stopped believing in promises. Massive structure maintained by treaty. Neutral ground where enemies met to negotiate and governments sent people to speak truth that was too dangerous to speak anywhere else. The docking process took 20 minutes. Protocols and security checks and the kind of bureaucratic theater that made sure everyone understood this was serious business handled by serious people. When the airlock finally cycled open, station security waited, both human and Azuran, treaty enforcement personnel whose job was maintaining neutrality in a place where neutrality was political fiction that somehow worked anyway. Commander Kalira, the lead officer said, Azuran male, older, carrying a rank insignia that suggested he'd seen enough combat to understand when protocol mattered and when it didn't. I am Chief Enforcer Drabek. You are formally remanded to tribunal custody pending testimony. I understand. Declan Bridger, you are formally remanded to tribunal custody as material witness. Yeah, I figured. Declan's voice carried exhaustion that made cooperation sound like surrender to inevitable. Where do you want me? Both of you will be held in secure quarters until tribunal convenes. You will be allowed legal counsel. You will be protected from external interference. Drabek paused. You will be safe here. That is promise of neutral ground. Kalira looked at Declan, at this human who'd saved her life and was now facing tribunal because saving enemy was apparently crime worth investigating. Thank you, she said. Simple words, insufficient for 47 days of medical care and conversation, and refusing to accept that enemy meant leaving someone to die, but they were the words she had. "You're welcome," Declan replied, that same tired smile. "Try not to fall over during testimony. Would be embarrassing after all that physical therapy. I will endeavor to remain vertical." They were separated then, led to different secure quarters, different preparations for testimony that would examine crimes committed by people who wore authority-like armor and gave orders that made soldiers into murderers. Kalira stood in her quarters, small, functional, window looking out at stars that were ancient and uncaring and had seen civilizations rise and fall and would see more after both human and Azuran turned to dust. 3 days until tribunal convened, 3 days to prepare, 3 days to transform 47 days of Ruari into testimony that would either change everything or change nothing, but would definitely be heard. She thought about the temple on Kepler 442b, about learning to move again, about a human who'd said not a chance and meant it, about the choice she'd made to transmit intelligence and save civilians and expose crimes at cost of her own safety. And she thought about what came next, about testimony, about speaking truth that would ripple through both militaries and change things, or not change things, but at minimum would be heard. "I was paralyzed," she said quietly to empty quarters, to herself, to the universe that had tried very hard to kill her and had failed. "I was abandoned. I was saved by enemy who became something more than friend, and I will be heard." She looked at the stars, at ancient light traveling for years to reach this moment, this place, this warrior who'd refused to die silent and wouldn't live silent either. 3 days passed in preparation, legal counsel, strategy sessions, medical examinations to verify her injuries and recovery, scans that proved the plasma wound pattern, documentation that showed 47 days of impossible healing. They gave her uniforms that fit, formal dress appropriate for tribunal testimony. She practiced walking in them, made sure her legs would hold through hours of questioning, made sure her voice would carry through chambers designed for acoustics and authority. Declan was somewhere else in the station. Separate quarters, separate preparation, but she knew he was there, knew he was ready, knew he would testify to what he'd done and why he'd done it, and refused to apologize for choosing compassion over protocol. On the morning of the 4th day, they brought her to the tribunal chamber. It was vast, representatives from both councils seated in tiered arrangements that made everyone visible to everyone else. Holographic displays showing her testimony simultaneously to both governments, recording everything for historical archives and news feeds and the kind of public scrutiny that made politicians nervous. Kalira walked to the witness platform, each step measured, controlled, showing strength she'd earned through 47 days of refusing to accept paralysis as permanent. The chamber fell silent as she took her position, standing upright, facing both councils, ready to speak truth they didn't want to hear. The chief arbiter, a human with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many testimonies about too many crimes, spoke first. "Commander Kalira of the Azuran Legion, 3rd Strike Division. You stand before this joint tribunal to provide testimony regarding alleged war crimes committed by Commander Vraxis of the Azuran Legion and Lieutenant Kovic of the Human Defense Forces. Do you understand the gravity of these proceedings?" "I understand," Kalira said. Her voice carried through the chamber. Clear, strong, the voice of someone who'd spent 47 days fighting for the right to speak. "Then please begin your testimony." Kalira took a breath. This was the moment. Everything she'd survived for. Everything she'd fought to become strong enough to do. 47 days ago, she began. Commander Vraxis received intelligence regarding a human colony. He classified it as military target, strategic value. He ordered me to relay firing coordinates for orbital strike. She paused, making sure every recorder caught every word. "I reviewed the intelligence personally. I ran independent scans. The target was not military installation. It was civilian population center. 300,000 people. Families, children, non-combatants protected under every treaty both our governments have signed." The holographic displays showed data as she spoke, the intelligence reports, the scan results. The evidence she'd downloaded before Vraxis shot her. I refused to relay coordinates. I informed Commander Vraxis that following his order would constitute war crime under Azuran military law and interstellar treaty, that I would not participate in mass murder of civilians regardless of strategic value. She met the eyes of the Azuran council members, held their gaze without flinching. Commander Vraxis responded by shooting me in the spine with close-range plasma fire. He then ordered my team to abandon me on the battlefield. The official report states I died honorably in combat. The truth is, I was executed for refusing to commit war crime, and my execution was buried under convenient casualty report. Murmurs ran through the chamber, both councils reacting, processing, understanding that this wasn't theoretical discussion about protocol. This was warriors standing before them with spine that had rebuilt itself, testifying to being shot by her own commander for saying no to murder. "But you survived," the chief arbiter said. "How Toda, a human combat medic named Declan Bridger, found me with 20 minutes left to live. He violated every protocol, committed what both our militaries would classify as desertion and treason. He spent 47 days providing medical care that kept me alive. That helped my body regenerate. That taught me to walk again." She gestured to her legs, to the body that stood upright despite impossible odds. "I stand before you because one person chose compassion over protocol. Because one person looked at enemy dying and said he wouldn't leave another person to die alone. Because one person committed treason for no better reason than it was right thing to do." The holographic displays shifted, showing medical scans, neural regeneration data, the plasma suture work, the neural stimulator. 47 days of documented recovery that proved every word she was saying. "I also stand before you," Kalira continued, "because Commander Vraxis's crime was not isolated incident. Investigation has revealed network of illegal operations, coordination between corrupt officers on both sides, war crimes buried under official reports, soldiers executed for refusing immoral orders." She pulled up the data from her neural implant, the communications she'd recorded, the evidence that had been embedded in her transmission. Lieutenant Kovich of the Human Defense Forces was Commander Vraxis's contact. They coordinated strikes on civilian targets on both sides. They falsified reports. They eliminated soldiers who questioned orders. They used this war as cover for atrocities that benefit no one except themselves. The chamber erupted, council members demanding clarification, legal teams cross-referencing data, news feeds broadcasting to both governments simultaneously. Kalira stood through it all, waiting, her legs holding, her voice ready. When the chamber quieted, she continued, "I do not testify for revenge. I do not testify for vindication. I testify because every warrior who refused illegal orders and died for it deserves voice. Because systems that protect criminals need to be challenged. Because silence is complicity." She looked at both councils, human and Azuran, enemy governments forced to hear truth together. "I testified before you today because one human showed me that enemy is not the person on the other side of war. Enemy is the officer who gives orders that make soldiers into murderers. Enemy is the system that buries crimes under protocol in official reports. I testified because I will not die silent. I will not let Commander Vraxis's crime be buried. I will not accept that following orders absolves soldiers of moral responsibility." Her voice grew stronger, carrying through the chamber with authority earned through 47 days of fighting paralysis. "I testified because 300,000 civilians are alive because I refused, because I transmitted intelligence despite cost to myself, because I chose principle over survival. And I testified because the human who saved me, who committed treason to keep me breathing, who spent 47 days teaching me to stand again, he deserves recognition, not punishment. He deserves commendation, not court-martial." He showed both our militaries what honor actually looks like, what compassion means, what it costs to choose right over easy. Kalira took a breath. Final words, final testimony, final truth. "I am Kalira of the Azuran Legion 3rd Strike Division. I refused illegal order. I was executed for it. I survived because someone chose compassion. I learned to walk because I refused to accept broken as permanent. And I stand before you now to speak truth that both our governments need to hear. War does not justify war crimes. Following orders does not absolve moral responsibility. And silence in face of atrocity makes us all complicit. She met the chief arbiter's eyes. That is my testimony. The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the chamber processing what they just heard. Every recorder capturing words that would ripple through both governments. Then Lieutenant Cyrus stood, walked to the platform beside Kalira. I was there, Cyrus said, her voice shaking but determined. I witnessed everything Commander Kalira testified. I watched Commander Vraxis shoot her. I watched our team abandon her. I followed orders when I should have followed conscience. I confirm every word of her testimony, and I add my own shame, my own failure, my own determination to make it mean something. Captain Theron stood next. Third Strike Division conducted independent investigation. Evidence supports Commander Kalira's testimony. We have communications records, scan data, witness statements. Commander Vraxis's crimes are documented and verified. Declan was brought forward. He walked to the platform, stood beside Kalira, not as prisoner, as witness, as the person who'd committed treason and would defend that choice. My name is Declan Bridgerman, he said. I'm a combat medic. I found Commander Kalira dying on a battlefield. I chose to save her instead of following protocol. I chose compassion over duty. I chose right over easy. I don't regret it. I won't apologize for it. I'd do it again. He looked at both counsels. You can court-martial me. You can call me traitor. You can punish me for violating regulations. But you can't make me regret choosing to save a life instead of letting someone die alone. She testified here today because I refused to follow orders that made me less human. Because I was tired of being the kind of person who walks away. Because sometimes the enemy needs help, and helping them is the most human thing you can do. The tribunal deliberated for 7 hours. Both counsels examining evidence, cross-referencing testimony, verifying every claim Kalira had made. When they reconvened, the chief arbiter's expression was grave. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence and testimony. We make the following findings. Commander Vraxis of the Azuran Legion, guilty of war crimes, guilty of attempted mass murder of civilians, guilty of falsifying combat death reports, guilty of executing subordinate for refusing illegal order. Sentence court-martial, 30 years imprisonment, stripped of all rank and honors, banned from military service in perpetuity. Lieutenant Kovich of the Human Defense Forces, guilty of conspiracy to commit war crimes, guilty of coordination of illegal strike operations, guilty of suppressing legitimate reports of misconduct. Sentence dishonorable discharge. Civilian trial pending on additional charges. Multiple other officers implicated, investigations ongoing. The chief arbiter looked at Declan. Declan Bridger. All charges of desertion dropped. All accusations of treason dismissed. This tribunal finds that your actions, while technically violating protocol, demonstrated moral courage and humanitarian compassion that honors both our species. You are hereby commended for extraordinary service under extreme circumstances. You are offered position in neutral station medical facility if you choose to accept. He turned to Kalira. Commander Kalira, your testimony has exposed systemic failures in both military structures. Your courage in speaking truth despite personal cost exemplifies the highest ideals of military honor. You are reinstated to Azuran Legion with full honors. You are offered command position in reformed Third Strike Division Oversight Committee. Your testimony will be used to reform protocols regarding illegal orders and protection of whistleblowers. This tribunal acknowledges that your actions, your refusal, your survival, your testimony, have triggered reforms that will save countless lives, that will protect soldiers who face impossible choices, that will hold commanders accountable for orders that violate basic human and Azuran rights. The chief arbiter stood. This tribunal is adjourned. Justice has been served. 6 months later, Kalira stood at Neutral Station's viewport, looking out at stars that had witnessed her testimony, that had seen justice, however imperfect, delivered to those who thought they were above it. She walked without trembling now, almost fully healed. Her nervous system had finished rerouting. The scar tissue had settled. She would never be exactly what she was before Vraxis shot her, but she was whole, strong, complete in ways that had nothing to do with combat capability. The war continued. Of course it did. Wars didn't end because two people testified to crimes. But things had changed. Both militaries had revised protocols, created oversight for illegal orders, established protection for whistleblowers who said no to atrocities. It wasn't peace, but it was progress. Declan joined her. He worked in the refugee medical center now, helping casualties from both sides, providing care to people who needed it regardless of which government had sent them to die. "You did it," he said, standing beside her at the viewport. Two people who'd changed something together. Made them listen. "We did it," Kalera corrected. "I would not have survived to testify without you." "Best terrible decision I ever made," she smiled. 6 months since tribunal. 6 months since testimony that had rippled through both governments and triggered reforms neither military had wanted but both needed. "What will you do next?" she asked. "Keep helping refugees. Keep being a disaster who occasionally makes good decisions." He paused. "Will you buy your Sparshino?" Azure Prime offered me command. I declined. "Why, I am teaching instead, training new officers, teaching them that saying no to illegal orders is duty, not treason. That honor sometimes means refusing, that following conscience costs less than losing it." She thought about the temple, about 47 days, about learning to stand, about a human who'd said not a chance and changed everything. "The Legion needs that," Declan said. "Both our militaries do." "Yes," she looked at him, at the person who'd committed treason and been commended for it, who'd faced court-martial and received recognition instead, who'd chosen compassion and been proven right. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome. Try not to need rescuing again." "I will endeavor to avoid paralysis in the future." They stood together at the viewport, two people who'd spoken truth to power, who'd faced consequences, who'd made someone listen. Kalera looked at distant stars, at light that had traveled for years to witness this moment, this conversation, this peace between former enemies who'd become something neither of them had words for, but both understood. "Not a chance we stay silent," she said quietly, using the words that had become their shared language, their private understanding of what they'd done and why it mattered. "Not anymore," Declan agreed. The universe watched, ancient and uncaring. But they had spoken. They had testified. They had made someone listen, and that was enough. Kalera of the Azuran Legion, paralyzed by betrayal, saved by compassion, healed by determination, standing now as teacher who would make sure the next generation understood. Sometimes saying no to murder is the most important yes you ever speak. Sometimes the enemy needs help, and helping them is the most human thing you can do. Sometimes terrible decisions are the best decisions you'll ever make. And sometimes when the universe tries very hard to kill you and you refuse to die quietly, you get to stand in starlight 6 months later and know that your voice mattered, that you changed something, that you made them listen. Not a chance she'd stayed silent. Not a chance she regretted it. Not a chance she'd do anything differently. The stars watched, and Kalera stood. And that was enough.